What is up, boys and girl? Today I'm going to be talking about the way that I level my characters in Last Epoch. I am by no means a speedrunner, but I do have a very consistent route that I always get questions about. How I get to Monoliths in under an hour, how do I get all my idols, how do I get all of my passives. This route does utilize some skips, but it's generally things that you can either use on a fresh league start or on an alt, or a very special route that you can use on a very overgeared alt if you're feeling especially brave, that can really cut back on the amount of time spent in the campaign, regardless of what character you're playing, what build you're playing. All of these routes should be viable for the most part, but especially the league starting ones. So I'll try to point out those differences whenever that does happen. Do keep in mind that initially things might get a little bit confusing. You know, picking up some of these quests might be a little bit tricky, but I believe by the time you're going to be leveling your third or maybe even second character, this route will become second nature, and I think it's a good investment of your time to learn it and be able to apply it to your next build that you want to be playing. Without further ado, let's get into it. We begin in the Divine Era. We have 2 passive points that we get in this section of the game that we don't have to worry about because you're going to be following the main story of the quest. However, do keep in mind that later on we will be doing skips that will avoid passives and idols from the main story, but we'll be making up for that in other sections of the game. The side quest that we need to fulfill here is going to be the Storeroom Saboteurs. This is a quest you get in the fortress walls, and all you have to do is go to the side storerooms where you fulfilled the quest, and once you return it to the guard outside, you will be able to continue your progression. In this section of the game, there are no idols to worry about. We head on over to the Ruined Era, in which case we will need to do a bunch of quests. We will begin with the evacuation. This is the quest where we have to talk to a bunch of NPCs. That will then result in us gaining another passive point. This is a quest that you really want to be doing early because it gives you also a bunch of XP while you traverse through the zone, which might power up your character. A lot of our power early on comes from these additional passives, so we do focus on those early, and it just so happens to be that many of these side quests are also much simpler to do in the earlier stages of the game than they are later on. Once we get to the Council's Chambers, we pick up Urza's Ledger quest. This quest, all you have to do is you go to Urza's library on the left side of the Council Chamber, and that will then give you Artem's offer quest once you've fulfilled all of the conditions. You continue over to the Upper District. Once you get there, there is a quest at the start called the Upper District. This is going to be another side quest that we're going to be doing. All you have to do is kill some mobs in the middle. There will be an indicator in the middle of the map where you have to do that once you get to the latter parts of the zone. And right next to it, also to the right, you're going to have the quest condition for Artem's offer, which will also drop a unique amulet, but that's not really something that we are particularly worried about here. We do get the 2 extra passive points here from the main quest, and then also you might have noticed that as a part of the main quest, we get an additional idol slot from a quest called the Void Assault. Once you're done with the Council Chambers, you will have 2 options. You can either proceed as you normally would with a fresh league start character that doesn't have any keys available to them, which unfortunately will take you about 20 to 30 extra minutes depending on your leveling speed. In this section, you won't have to do any quests, or you can go to the Lightless Arbor dungeon, which will give you 2 passive points, and it will give you an idol slot. However, do keep in mind that this dungeon is incredibly difficult for what would then be a level 15 character. So if you don't have access to a very strong build or very strong gear, and especially if you're on hardcore, be super careful about this. I've done this before without any extra LP gear or anything like that on my uniques, and it was very hard. But again, if you don't have a key or if it's a league start, you progress with your main story as you normally would, but do keep in mind you can save yourself about 20 minutes with this dungeon. If you do the dungeon, or if you don't do the dungeon, you end up in the same spot, which is going to be the Corrupted Lake. The way that you access this zone is through either the exit of the previously mentioned dungeon, or you go to the Risen Lake and there's going to be a rift there. Once you fulfill that quest, you're going to be getting another passive point and a additional idle slot. Obviously, if you've gotten your passive and your idle slot from the Lightless Arbor, this is a quest that you're not gonna have to do, but do keep in mind that you're spawning there, so if you want a little bit more early power, it is something that you can optionally do for more power early on. We continue from the Risen Lake to the Imperial Dreadnought, where you will find the main quest for killing the boss will give you an additional idle slot. We will then be transported to the Imperial Era, which will give us another set of quests in the 5th chapter. This is going to be the main quest of Oracle's Aid. You don't have to worry about this one. And then we've got the Sapphire Tablet that you pick up at the start of the Shining Cove. And we will be having our first mandatory dungeon skip, which is going to be Temporal Sanctum. Both of these quests also will give us 2 additional idle slots on top of the 3 passives that we will be getting from them. We fulfill all of the conditions, and once we get to the Oracle's Abode, we can transport ourselves back after talking to the NPC over to the Shining Cove. In which case, we will then, at the end of the zone, gain access to the Temporal Sanctum. Once you have defeated the NPC at the end of the zone, and you have the Temporal Sanctum waypoint, you can go back to Oracle's Abode to pick up your passives from the Sapphire Tablet quest. At this point, if you're feeling strong enough, and if you have access to Temporal Sanctum keys, you can use the Temporal Sanctum dungeon to skip yourself over to the next part of the campaign. However, do keep in mind that the Temporal Sanctum, I believe, is level 50 or 55, so that might be quite difficult if you have quite a lot of twin gear. But in most other people's cases, your character will most definitely be strong enough to head on over to the End of Time and enter your first Monolith. Now, this will very much depend on how strong your character is, what kind of gear you have access to. I find that on all of my league starts, I never had a problem running Monoliths at this stage of the game. But this is something that you should be keeping in mind, that you might struggle a little bit early on, but you get so much XP from Monoliths that you level up very quickly, and your character should be gaining a lot of power very rapidly. The purpose of us running Monoliths at this stage of the game is because we can either progress through our Monolith timeline as you normally would, or if you don't have access to a temporal key, we're running Monoliths all the way until you drop a temporal key, or we feel strong enough to run the Temporal Sanctum, which for most character is going to be probably somewhere around level 40 to 50. Do keep in mind that I have heard of some people that got incredibly unlucky at this stage of the game, and it took them until level 60, in some cases 65 even, in the first Monolith to get their Temporal Sanctum key. So if you want to progress, feel free to do so. You don't have to do the rest of your campaign right now. Just make sure that you keep your eyes peeled for this key, as it is going to be mandatory for you to continue your progression. Once you have your key and everything ready to go, you get through the Temporal Sanctum, and it's going to spit you out at the end in the Radiant Dunes in what I believe to be Chapter 9. In this case, you should have almost all of your passives and almost all of your idols, so these next quests are going to be quick. There is a little bit of selection as to what you want to be doing, because this puts you very close to the end of the game, so if you want the additional attributes and your character is strong enough to do so, you can complete everything. But for the most part, for this guide, we're going to be focusing on the side quests while progressing the main storyline. The nice thing about these quests in particular is that just about all of them both give us a passive and an idol slot, but it's the idols that we really care about more now, since we are still missing 3. For the first quest, we're going to be heading on over to the left side for Soreth Ka. This is a hub that will give us a quest called Harton's Idol, and all we're gonna have to do is head on over to the crossroads, run a little bit north, and once you get to the objective, pick it up and TP back to town. You turn it back in and you're ready to go back to your waypoint in the Radiant Dunes. When you get to the Radiant Dunes, focus on the main quest, but make sure to keep an eye out on the Desert Treasure. This is going to be a sort of cellar that you're going to have to enter. There's multiple entrance points, and in the middle of that cellar zone, there's going to be an additional monster that you're going to have to kill, which will then allow you to proceed over to Majelka's Upper District. Once we get to Majelka's District, we talk to all the necessary NPCs to get our Desert Treasure quest done. We pick up the Arjani, the Ruby Commander quest, and we head on over to Majelka Lower District, in which case we turn to the left and kill Arjani, the Ruby Commander. We continue with our main story, which will give us our final passive eventually. But for now, we head on over to Majelka Slums. Here we will have 3 entrances to 3 different zones. One of them is going to have nothing. One of them is going to have the NPC for Desert Treasure, which will have a bunch of haggling options. Don't really worry about it. Choose the lowest money option. You're always going to get your passive. And one for the main quest. If you want to complete the entirety of your campaign now, you can do so, and you will get your final passive point from Apophis and Majasa, which is the main quest. But if you aren't strong enough and you somehow really desperately need your passive point right now, you can fulfill previously available quests such as a study in time, a hidden gem, or maybe lesser refuge. But these are going to be a little bit difficult, and they're going to take up an obnoxious amount of time compared to just fulfilling the main storyline. So I would highly recommend that that's going to be something that you would go for. At least that's what I would do, which is pretty much what this entire guide is all about. So hopefully this stuff was informative for you guys. Hopefully this is a route that you can follow for the future. Obviously, if there are things that you're more comfortable with, that you're more familiar with somewhere on the route, you can make those adjustments for yourself and maybe improve the route that I typically take with your own little touches. Maybe comment about that in the comment section below. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me, guys. Hope you have a great day. Remember to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.